The streets of what once was New York City were now a haunting reflection of humanity's downfall. The Xerics had claimed Earth as their own, and every corner of the world was under their control. Towering alien ships hovered ominously in the skies, while sleek surveillance drones patrolled the streets below, searching for any signs of rebellion. Human life had become a mere shadow of its former self, oppressed, subdued, and watched at all times. In the heart of this chaos, a group of humans known only as the Silent operated in secrecy. They were not soldiers or warriors, but everyday people who had been pushed too far, and their time to act was approaching. The Silent's base of operations was hidden deep within the ruins of a forgotten subway station, one of the last places on Earth untouched by the aliens' invasion. It was here that Ilara, a brilliant hacker and the key figure in the rebellion, worked tirelessly, always one step ahead of the Xerics, always hidden in the shadows. Ilara sat hunched over her makeshift console, the faint glow of multiple monitors casting an eerie light across her face. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as her eyes scanned streams of encrypted data. The alien communication network had been virtually impenetrable for years, but Ilara was different. She had a gift. She could see patterns in the noise, cracks in the walls where others saw only solid encryption. She had been monitoring the Xerics for weeks, searching for any weakness, any mistake. Then she found it, a faint signal hidden within the regular alien transmissions. It was like a spark in the dark, an anomaly that no one had noticed. At first, it seemed like just a glitch, a random bit of corrupted data. But Ilara's instincts told her otherwise. She ran the signal through multiple layers of analysis, isolating and refining it. After hours of sifting through the code, she was sure of one thing. This was no mistake. The signal wasn't just a flaw. It was a crack in the Xeric's armor, a flaw in their communication system, a vulnerability, perhaps even a backdoor. Ilara could barely contain her excitement. This was the moment they had been waiting for. This signal could be their chance to bring down the aliens' grip on Earth. Her heart pounded in her chest as she leaned forward, her eyes flickering between the data streams. She carefully prepared to send the signal back into the Xeric's network, something that could either give them an advantage or alert the aliens to their presence. The risk was enormous. If they were detected, the entire resistance would be crushed before it even began. Just as Ilara was about to make her move, a loud crash echoed from the entrance of the station. The sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, sounded from the stairwell leading down to her hideout. The Xerics. They had found her. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She quickly pulled her hand away from the keyboard, staring at the glowing screen in horror. She couldn't let them catch her. Not now. Not with everything on the line. The door burst open, and two Xeric soldiers, humanoid figures with glowing eyes and sleek, silver armor, stepped inside. They scanned the room, their weapons drawn. The moment they spotted Ilara, one of them raised a hand, signaling for her to freeze. Ilara's mind raced, but her training kicked in. She dove to the side, grabbing her encrypted data chip from the console as she rolled toward the exit. Her heart pounded in her ears as she sprinted toward the narrow tunnel that led further into the depths of the subway system. Behind her, she could hear the soldiers' pursuit, their footsteps echoing through the corridors. She didn't have time to think. She had to get the data out, get it to the others. The entire future of humanity could depend on it. The pursuit was relentless, but Ilara was faster, more agile. She darted down twisting tunnels, her breath coming in quick gasps. She didn't dare look back, focusing only on the path ahead. She had to make it out. She had to deliver this message. Ilara's feet slammed against the cold concrete floor as she dashed through the dimly lit tunnels beneath the city. Every step felt like an eternity. Her breath ragged in her chest as she pushed her body to its limits. The Xeric soldiers were close. She could hear their mechanical footsteps growing louder, echoing through the narrow passageways. She couldn't afford to be caught. Not now. Not when the fate of humanity hung in the balance. Her mind raced. The data chip she had stolen from the Xerix communication system was invaluable. It contained the key to breaking the alien stranglehold on Earth, information that could turn the tide in the Resistance's favor. She had to get it to the others. They had to act fast before the Xerix realized what had happened and shut down the vulnerability she had uncovered. Ilara's thoughts flickered to the team she'd left behind. The Silent weren't an army. They weren't even a militia. They were a handful of people, hackers, former soldiers, engineers scattered across the globe, working in the shadows to undermine the Xerix's control. But together, they were making a difference. Small, covert strikes had slowed the alien advance, and whispers of their successes had spread among the oppressed people of Earth. They had become a symbol of hope. But Ilara knew that this data, this discovery, was their best chance to strike a crippling blow against the invaders. She could hear the soldiers now, closer. Her pulse raced as she turned a corner and ducked into a narrow alcove, pressing her back against the damp wall. The Xerix were methodical in their search. She had no illusions that she could outrun them forever, especially in the tight, labyrinthine tunnels. But she had a plan. One chance. From the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow flicker across the far end of the tunnel. She held her breath, eyes locked on the entrance. 2 Xerix soldiers passed by, their energy weapons scanning the area. Ilara's heart thudded in her chest as they moved past her hiding spot, oblivious to her presence. She waited, still as a statue, her mind focused on her next move. The soldiers had passed, but Ilara knew that would not last. They would double back. The tunnel network was vast, but the Xerix were ruthless, and their tracking technology was unparalleled. She needed to get out now. With practiced speed, she crept toward a small maintenance door tucked in the corner of the tunnel. It was old, forgotten, just like most of the subway system. The Xerix didn't care to patrol every corner. This door had been used only once, by a few rebellious humans who had slipped through the cracks. But now it was her escape. Her fingers moved quickly as she hacked the ancient door's lock, bypassing its outdated security measures. A soft click echoed in the silence. The door opened, revealing a narrow staircase leading to an abandoned service tunnel that ran parallel to the subway line. Ilara slipped through the doorway, pulling the door closed behind her, and then raced up the stairs. With every step, she felt the weight of the data chip in her pocket. The Silent had trusted her with it, trusted her to find a way to bring humanity back from the brink of extinction. She couldn't fail them. Not now. She reached the top of the stairs and found herself in a deserted industrial district. The city above was shrouded in darkness, save for the glow of the Xerix's hovering ships in the sky. But Ilara wasn't alone. She knew the Silent had a network of safe houses across the city, hidden in plain sight. Her destination was close, a safe house where she would meet with the others and deliver the data that could change everything. As she moved through the streets, keeping to the shadows, Ilara's mind never stopped working. The signal she had uncovered could break the Xerix's communications network wide open. But that was only the beginning. The real challenge would be exploiting that weakness, taking the fight to the heart of the alien empire. It was a dangerous plan, one that could easily end in disaster. But Ilara was determined. She knew the Silent had no choice but to act. A soft transmission crackled in her earpiece, breaking her concentration. It was Jace, a former soldier and one of the leaders of the Silent. His voice was urgent. "Ilara, do you have it? Are you clear?" "I'm almost there," she whispered back, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'll be at the safe house in 5 minutes." "Good. We're ready. We've been tracking your progress. Stay sharp." Ilara tightened her grip on the data chip, quickening her pace. She had to keep moving. The Xerix were never far behind. The Silent's mission was just beginning, and she would be the one to lead them to victory, if she could make it out alive. But as she approached the safe house, a chill ran down her spine. A sound, a faint buzzing, almost imperceptible, echoed from above. She glanced up and her blood ran cold. A Xerix drone was hovering overhead, its sensors scanning the streets. They were closer than she realized. The chase was about to begin again. Ilara's heart raced as the Xerix drone hovered above her, its mechanical eyes scanning the streets. She ducked into the nearest alley, pressing herself against the wall as it passed overhead. The faint hum of its engines echoed in the distance, but the danger was far from over. The drone's sensors were advanced, and it would be back soon. She had to get to the safe house. She had to get the data to Jace and the others. As she made her way through the maze of city streets, her mind kept returning to the task at hand. The data chip. The information it contained had the potential to cripple the Xerix's communications network, but it wasn't enough just to disable their technology. The Silent needed a leader, someone who could rally the scattered resistance cells and unite them under one cause. The Silent's greatest weapon wasn't the data or the sabotage missions. It was their ability to inspire others, to spark a fire of rebellion in the hearts of every human still resisting the alien occupation. It was then that she thought of Kale. Kale had been the firebrand the Silent needed, a former soldier with the scars to prove it. He had seen the worst of the Xerix's brutality, and his hatred for the aliens ran deep. When he spoke, people listened. His voice was a rallying cry for those who had lost everything. It was Kale who had first pulled the Silent together, who had set them on the path of sabotage and subversion. And it was Kale who had pushed Ilara to think beyond the data, to think of the bigger picture. But Kale had been gone for weeks, since their last mission. The Xerix had come close to capturing him, and he'd disappeared into the underworld of the Resistance. Ilara hadn't heard from him since. His disappearance had left a void in the Silent, but his presence was still felt in every operation, in every plan. She knew that if the Silent were going to stand a chance against the Xerix, Cal's return was inevitable. And when he did return, they would need to be ready. Ilara pushed these thoughts aside as she neared the safe house. The door was barely visible beneath the shadows of a dilapidated building. She slipped through a narrow passageway, reaching for the hidden keypad that would unlock the door. Her fingers moved quickly, typing in the secret code. The door clicked open, and she slipped inside, breathing a sigh of relief. Inside the safe house, the air was thick with tension. Jace, the soldier who had first contacted her, stood by a wall, his arms crossed. His eyes scanned the room, his posture tense, as though he were waiting for something, waiting for her. He didn't speak as she entered, but there was a fire in his eyes that told her he was ready for whatever came next. "Ilara," he said quietly, his voice low, "we've been tracking your progress. You're lucky to be alive." She nodded, not taking offense at his bluntness. "I've got the data. The signal is genuine. There's a weakness in their communication system, a backdoor. I can't be sure how far it goes, but it's a start." Jace's eyes widened with interest. This could change everything. "We need to move quickly," Ilara replied. "I don't know how long we have before the Xerix realize what's happening, but we can't waste this chance." Jace nodded, and then his gaze shifted to the corner of the room where a figure had just emerged from the shadows. It was Kale. "Ilara." Cal's voice was a gravelly whisper, his eyes locked onto hers. His face was more haggard than she remembered, his clothes torn from weeks of hiding, but his presence filled the room like a spark in the darkness. "It's time." Her heart skipped a beat. She had hoped for his return, but seeing him now, standing tall and resolute, even after everything the Xerix had thrown at him, was a relief she hadn't realized she needed. "I've been with the underground cells," Cal continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "The people are ready. They're waiting for the signal. But they need more than just hope, Ilara. They need a plan. They need something they can strike at. And we have it," Ilara said, pulling the data chip from her jacket and placing it on the table. "The back door. We can use it to cripple the Xerix's communications. It's the first step in taking back our world." Kale took the chip, his fingers brushing against hers for a brief moment. The weight of the situation hung between them, but there was no time for sentiment. This is only the beginning. We strike tonight. The Xerics won't expect it. Jace looked from Kale to Ilara. We'll need to coordinate with the other cells. We can't afford to waste time. If we hit them hard enough, we might buy ourselves a chance to move on the next target. Then it's settled, Kale said, his eyes burning with intensity. We'll strike tonight. The fire will spread, and we'll make sure they know that Earth isn't finished yet. The room was filled with the weight of his words. The Silent were more than just a resistance. They were a symbol, a spark that could ignite the fire of rebellion across Earth. And now, with the first blow to the Xerics' communication system, the fire had started. Ilara glanced at Kale, seeing in him the leader the Silent had needed. Together, they would make sure the Xerics felt the full weight of humanity's defiance. The uprising had begun. The safe house buzzed with activity as Ilara, Kale, and Jace worked together to coordinate the Resistance's next move. The room, filled with faded maps of cities and diagrams of Xerics infrastructure, felt like the heart of a storm waiting to break. The members of the Silent gathered around, each with their own piece of the puzzle, preparing for the mission that could either change the course of humanity's fight or doom them all to extinction. Ilara sat at the table, the data chip still in her hand. She had spent the last few hours decrypting what little she could, but it was clear that the real work would need to be done in the heart of the Xerics' communication hub. A direct strike at the center of their operations was their best chance, but it came with immense risks. The back door isn't a full breach, Ilara explained to the group, her voice steady. We can disrupt their communications temporarily, but without a deeper level of access, they'll patch it up quickly. We'll need to hit hard, and we'll need to move fast. Jace, ever the strategist, nodded. Our window of opportunity is limited. Once we make the first strike, they'll know we're coming. We won't have much time before they start to retaliate. The question is, how do we hit them where it hurts? That's where the cells come in. Kale spoke up from across the room. He was still gathering his gear, preparing for the battle ahead. We've already set up a network of underground cells in the key cities. They're ready to launch attacks at the same time as we disrupt the Xerics' communications. If we coordinate these strikes, we can keep them off balance long enough to land a serious blow. Ilara studied the map, her mind working through the logistics. The key will be timing. We hit their comms network, and we need every cell to launch their attack within minutes. We'll take out their ground forces, hit their relay stations, and create chaos. The Xerics won't be able to maintain their grip if we blind them temporarily. Jace was already tapping commands into his tablet, organizing the various rebel cells. I can initiate the signal relay. The cells in Paris, London, Tokyo, and New Delhi are all prepped. If we synchronize their attacks, it'll stretch the Xerics too thin. Kale crossed his arms, scanning the group with intense eyes. Once we've made the first strike, we can't just vanish. We need to rally the people. The Silent may be small, but we have the ability to spread the message. This is our chance to show them that humanity won't go down quietly. Ilara could feel the weight of the moment settling in. This wasn't just a mission. This was the spark that could ignite a planet-wide uprising. If they succeeded, humanity's chances of survival would skyrocket. But if they failed, the Xerics would crush them all, and Earth would become a lost world. Everyone knows their role, Ilara said, her voice firm as she looked around the room. The cells are ready, the signal is prepped, and we move out in 30 minutes. We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we don't look back. This is our shot. As the team dispersed to their respective stations, Ilara lingered for a moment, her gaze lingering on the map of Earth. The Xerics had taken so much from them: homes, families, freedom. But they had not taken humanity's spirit, and that was something the aliens could never crush. She glanced at Kull, who was adjusting his weapons, preparing for the mission ahead. Their eyes met, and she saw the same determination in him that she felt in herself. This was no longer just about survival. It was about reclaiming their world. about proving that humanity had more fight left in it than the Xerics could ever imagine. Kale gave her a small nod, the silent understanding between them clear. He knew the risks. They all did. But there was no turning back now. Ilara took a deep breath, standing tall. She could feel the tension in the air, like the moment before a storm. This was it. The resistance was no longer just whispers in the dark. It was about to roar to life, and they would strike with everything they had. "We move in 5, she called, her voice carrying through the safe house. With that, the Silent prepared to make their stand. As Ilara and the team headed for the exit, the first sign of dawn was just beginning to break through the cracks of the city's shattered skyline. The world was about to change. The uprising was no longer a secret, and in this quiet, broken world, humanity's fury would be heard. The storm was coming, and the Xerics would never see it coming. The streets of New York were eerily quiet as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The city, once a bustling hub of humanity, now stood as a testament to the Xerics' occupation. Towering alien structures dominated the skyline, casting long shadows over the ruins of human civilization. The Xerics had transformed Earth into their own fortress, but beneath their cold, alien grip, humanity's heart still beat. And tonight, it would strike. Ilara stood at the edge of the safe house, her breath steady, her mind sharp. The team had dispersed, each member assigned a critical role in the operation. She had a singular task: reach the Xerics communications tower and inject the data that would trigger their backdoor. The moment the signal was sent, the entire resistance would act in unison, launching their attacks across the globe. It was the perfect plan, if they could execute it without being detected. She adjusted her tactical vest, her fingers brushing over the encrypted data chip in her pocket. The weight of it was a constant reminder of the immense responsibility she carried. She had fought in the shadows for so long, but now there was no turning back. She was about to lead humanity's first true counterattack against the Xerics, and failure was not an option. Jace's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Ilara, you're clear. The cells are in position. Stand by for the signal." Ilara nodded, though he couldn't see her. She glanced up at the towering alien structure in the distance, its sleek, silver form standing like a sentinel in the heart of the city. It was surrounded by Xerics patrols, dozens of them, walking in perfect synchronization. Their presence made every step Ilara took a calculated risk. Her instincts, honed over years of operating in the shadows, guided her as she navigated the alleyways, staying low and avoiding the drones that patrolled overhead. She had to move quickly and quietly. Every moment was precious. Her pulse quickened as she approached the Xerics communications tower. It loomed ahead, a monolithic structure that seemed to reach for the sky, its surface gleaming under the artificial lights. Ilara could feel the hum of alien technology vibrating in the air. She had to get inside without alerting the sentries. She crouched behind a stack of crates, watching as the patrols passed by in a flawless pattern. The Xerics were meticulous, each soldier a perfect cog in their machine. But Ilara was no less precise. She had studied their movements, learned their routines. It was her only advantage. The moment she had been waiting for came. A patrol turned down a side street, leaving the path to the tower momentarily clear. Ilara sprinted, her breath silent as she slipped past the last guard and into the tower's shadow. Once inside the security perimeter, the real work began. She needed to access the tower's control systems, something that had never been done before. Her heart hammered in her chest as she approached the exterior terminal. The last line of defense was a complex biometric scanner, a feature Ilara knew would require a more subtle approach. She took a deep breath and activated the tiny portable device in her hand. A scanner designed to bypass Xeric security. It pulsed with a faint green light as it connected to the terminal, simulating the biometric signatures of a high-ranking officer. It was a trick, one that had worked before, but it would only give her a few minutes. The clock was ticking. The scanner beeped once, then twice, before the terminal's door slid open with a hiss. Ilara slipped inside, quickly disabling the security cameras and moving toward the central control room. She had no time to waste. The control room was vast, filled with screens displaying data streams and alien symbols. At the center of it all was the core server, humming with activity. She approached it cautiously, her fingers moving swiftly over the console, her mind focused on the task at hand. She inserted the data chip into the interface, and the system whirred to life. The back door was opening. The Xyrix's communications network was about to be cracked wide open. Ilara's heart raced as she navigated through the alien system, bypassing layers of encryption and setting the signal in motion. The alien security protocols were sophisticated, but Ilara had anticipated their defenses. She knew the system well now, and the data chip, her key to the enemy's heart, was feeding its signal to the global resistance. The control room hummed with a low mechanical sound as the data transfer completed. She had done it. The back door had been activated, and the Xyrix's communications grid would soon be flooded with static, rendering them blind and deaf. Now, all she had to do was escape. But the moment the transfer finished, alarms blared across the room. Red lights flashed, and a mechanical voice echoed through the halls. The Xyrix had detected the breach. "Ilara, you're compromised." Jace's voice crackled in her earpiece. "Get out of there, now." Ilara didn't hesitate. She turned, sprinting toward the exit as the sound of Xyrix soldiers' heavy boots echoed in the corridor. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she pushed herself harder, faster, knowing that the window of escape was rapidly closing. As she burst out of the control room, she could see the alien patrols converging on her position. The tower was on lockdown. There was no time to waste. She had triggered the first strike, but now it was up to the resistance to carry it through. "Ilara, we've got you covered." Cal's voice came through the earpiece, calm and unwavering. "Move fast. We'll handle the rest." The first strike had begun, and the Xyrix were already reeling. But the battle was far from over. The storm had come, and now humanity would fight back with everything it had. The sound of her boots pounding against the cracked concrete echoed in Ilara's ears as she sprinted through the narrow alleyways, the distant wail of alien sirens piercing the air. The Xyrix communications tower loomed behind her, now a scene of chaos. She could hear the heavy stomps of Xyrix soldiers closing in from every direction. Her escape route was narrowing, but she had one advantage. The storm had already begun, and the first wave of resistance was in motion. "Ilara, status report." Jace's voice crackled in her earpiece, his tone clipped, focused. "I've triggered the back door," she panted, glancing over her shoulder. "The Xyrix are responding. I'm about a minute away from their lockdown perimeter. I need a way out. Fast." "I've got a team waiting at the extraction point," Jace replied. "Just keep running. They'll cover you." A sudden burst of gunfire from the far end of the alley snapped Ilara out of her thoughts. A squad of Xyrix soldiers, their plasma rifles aimed at her, had materialized from the shadows. She didn't hesitate. With a surge of adrenaline, she dropped to the ground, narrowly avoiding the searing blasts that tore through the air above her head. The shots from the plasma rifles tore into the walls around her, but Ilara was already on the move, weaving through the alley like a shadow. She reached into her pack, pulling out a small device, a disruptor grenade. It was a last resort, a tool the Resistance had perfected to blind the Xyrix's electronic sensors. She activated it, throwing it toward the soldiers as she sprinted to the next alley. The device emitted a brilliant flash of light and a pulse of electromagnetic energy, briefly disabling the Xyrix's weapons and sensors. For a brief moment, the Xyrix were disoriented. Ilara used that window of opportunity to slip past their lines, her heart pounding with the knowledge that each second brought her closer to safety and to the unknown. "Almost there, Ilara." Jace's voice was reassuring now. "Keep moving. You're 15 seconds from the extraction point." She took a sharp turn, veering onto a side street that led to a hidden service entrance. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter behind her, drowned out by the urgency of her escape. She could see the extraction team ahead, 3 figures clad in dark, tactical gear, their weapons drawn at eyes scanning the area for threats. They'd positioned themselves at the entrance to an underground tunnel, a lifeline to safety beneath the city. Ilara didn't waste a second. She dashed for the entrance, diving into the shadows as a voice shouted behind her. "Over there." After her. The Xeric soldiers had regrouped faster than she anticipated. As she reached the entrance, she heard the hiss of alien weapons charging up. The extraction team opened fire, creating a wall of suppression as Ilara reached the tunnel. "Go now," one of the operatives yelled, pulling her inside just as a barrage of plasma fire lit up the space where she'd been standing. The heavy door to the tunnel slammed shut behind them with a deafening clang, sealing her momentarily from the chaos above. The team led her down the dark passage, their faces illuminated only by the dim glow of their tactical lights. She couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. The first phase of the mission had been a success. The Xerix's communications were disabled, and the resistance cells across the globe were already acting. But that victory was only the beginning. The Xerix were reeling, yes, but they weren't defeated. And Ilara knew that the hardest battles were yet to come. They had crippled the enemy's communication network, but without a larger strategic shift, their success would be fleeting. The underground tunnels stretched deep beneath the city, a labyrinth of hidden escape routes that the resistance had maintained for years. They were the arteries of the silent, where their operations began and ended. Ilara felt a brief surge of gratitude for the people who had kept these paths alive all this time. The tunnel system opened up into a hidden safe house, one of many scattered throughout the city. Ilara emerged into a dimly lit room, where Jace and Kale were waiting. They exchanged brief nods as Ilara took a seat, still catching her breath. "We did it," Jace said, his voice steady, but his eyes betraying the exhaustion of the moment. "The signal's been sent out, and the cells are all launching their attacks. The Xerics have no idea what's coming next." Kale was already tapping commands into a wall-mounted terminal. His expression was unreadable, his mind clearly focused on the next phase of the mission. "The backlash has begun. We got a window of opportunity to hit them hard before they adapt. We can't waste it." Ilara nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her. The first strike had been a success, but the Xerics were ruthless. They would retaliate. They would adapt. But the Silent had already proven one thing. Humanity was capable of fighting back in ways the aliens couldn't comprehend. "The cells are in motion," she said, her voice gaining strength as she looked at Kale and Jace. "We've got one shot at this. If we can push forward, strike at their key infrastructure, we might have a chance to break their hold on Earth. But it's going to take everything we've got." Cal's eyes met hers, the fire of determination flickering in them. "Then let's make sure they know what happens when they push humanity too far." As the resistance rallied around them, readying for the next phase, Ilara knew one thing for certain. The battle for Earth had just begun. And this time, humanity wasn't going down without a fight. The storm was gathering. From deep beneath the surface, humanity's last resistance had struck, but the Xerics were no slouches. Their technological prowess was staggering, and their response to the sudden disruption of their communication network was swift and brutal. Across the globe, the resistance was growing in strength, but so was the alien enemy. The stakes were higher than ever before. Ilara sat in the dimly lit war room, watching the projections of the world map flicker to life on the screen in front of her. The global scale of the Resistance's actions was now undeniable. Rebel cells had launched simultaneous strikes in New Delhi, Paris, London, and Tokyo. The Xerics had been thrown off balance, but they were beginning to regroup, responding with their devastating countermeasures. "We've hit them hard," Kale said, his voice tight with concern. "But they're starting to react faster than we anticipated. If we don't push now, they'll tighten their grip on the cities again." Jace, standing by the communications terminal, nodded grimly. "They're deploying reinforcements from off-world. They're planning a planetary-wide lockdown. If they succeed, all of this, he gestured to the room, will be for nothing. Ilara clenched her fists, her mind racing. They had planned for contingencies, but the Xerics had always been several steps ahead. Now, it was their turn. She had the data. She had the key to tipping the scales. But it would require everything, to execute it. We can't wait for the cells to keep drawing attention in the major cities, she said, her voice low but unwavering. It's time to go for the jugular. The Xerics' central command is based off-planet, but they have a planetary command center right here, in orbit. If we can cripple that, it'll cut off their ability to coordinate their forces. Kale looked up from the map, his gaze narrowing. You're suggesting an orbital strike. Do we even have the firepower for something like that? We do, Ilara said, already pulling up a new set of coordinates on the screen. There's an old military facility, deep in the Arctic. The Silent have been scrounging tech for years. We've got a prototype, a long-range pulse cannon, something that can disable their orbital command center. But it's a one-time shot. Jace ran his hand through his hair. And what if we miss? We only have one chance. If the cannon doesn't work, we'll have nothing left. It's the only play we've got left, Ilara replied, her voice steady. We've been fighting in the shadows for too long. It's time to draw them into the light. If we can take out their command center, we'll cripple their entire operation. They won't be able to direct their forces or respond to any attacks we make. It'll buy us the time we need to finish this. The room fell silent as everyone processed the gravity of the plan. The risk was monumental. They were betting everything on a single shot, a shot that would determine the fate of humanity. But Ilara knew it had to be done. The longer they fought, the more the Xerics adapted. This was their one chance to break their stranglehold. After a long pause, Kale nodded, a grim determination settling over him. Then we move out. Everyone's prepped. We leave in 2 hours. Ilara stood, her mind already shifting gears. She had always believed in the Silent's ability to do the impossible. But this time, they weren't just operating in the shadows. They were going to go toe-to-toe with an empire that had conquered planets. She felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she wasn't going to let fear stop her. We don't miss, she said, her gaze locking with each member of the team. We do this for Earth. For our people. For everyone we've lost. Jace gave her a tight nod. We're with you, always. The team's resolve hardened, their mission clear. They were about to launch their most dangerous strike yet. As they prepared to depart for the Arctic facility, the quiet tension in the room was palpable. Time was running out, and the fate of Earth rested on their shoulders. The journey to the Arctic facility was grueling, a test of endurance for all of them. The cold was biting, the landscape stark and barren. They moved swiftly, each member of the team focused on the task ahead. They had no time to waste, and the closer they got to the facility, the more the weight of their mission settled in. Ilara was the first to spot the entrance, hidden beneath layers of ice and rock. They had reached the facility, and it was time to make their final move. Inside, the pulse cannon stood, a massive piece of technology that could turn the tide of war. But they had only one chance to fire it. We're here, Ilara said, stepping forward. Prepare for final launch. The Xerics won't stop coming for us after this. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. The cannon hummed to life as the team got into position, their fingers hovering over the activation controls. Outside, the first signs of Xerics reinforcements began to appear, ships descending from orbit, their lights glinting off the darkened sky. Ready, Kale said, his eyes fixed on the cannon. Ilara nodded. Fire. The cannon's massive frame vibrated beneath Ilara's hands as she initiated the launch sequence. The world seemed to hold its breath as the great weapon powered up, a deep, resonant hum echoing through the icy cavern. The Xerics were coming. They knew where they were, and the storm of retaliation was about to descend. She glanced at her team, Jace, Kale, and the others, all with steely determination in their eyes. The pulse cannon was their only hope. There would be no second chances. The countdown on the terminal flickered before her eyes. 10 seconds. "Everyone, brace yourselves," Ilara said, her voice calm but resolute. The team tightened their grip on their weapons, ready for what was to come. The Arctic facility, once a silent relic, had now become the epicenter of humanity's last gambit. The moment the cannon fired, the fate of the world would change forever. 5 seconds. Outside, the first Xeric ships loomed on the horizon, their sleek, silver forms cutting through the darkness. The hum of their engines echoed through the frozen wastes. They were coming faster than Ilara had expected, and the clock was ticking down. 3 seconds. The pulse cannon powered up with a sudden surge of energy, the atmosphere around them crackling as it gathered the tremendous force it needed. Ilara's heart hammered in her chest. If they missed now, they would be overrun. The Xerics would crush them, and Earth's last hope would be extinguished. 2 seconds. Ilara's finger hovered over the firing control, and in that instant, she knew she wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. She was fighting for every human being who had ever lived, for the generations who would come after, for every lost soul who had died resisting the alien invaders. 1 second. "Fire!" Ilara shouted, her voice cutting through the cold, metallic air. The cannon discharged in a brilliant flash, sending a wave of radiant energy across the barren landscape. The ground shook beneath them as the pulse of the weapon shot upward, piercing the atmosphere and reaching for the Xeric's command center in orbit. The sky above them lit up in a blinding flare of energy, as though the very heavens had cracked open. Ilara squinted against the brightness, her heart racing. She could feel the reverberations of the cannon's blast in her bones, the force of it almost overwhelming. Then, silence. The world held its breath. The Xeric ships, those titans of destruction, faltered. Their coordinated movements slowed as a wave of static rippled across their communication channels. The pulse cannon had found its mark. The Xeric's orbital command center, their nerve center for global operations, had been disabled. The chain of command had been severed. One by one, the alien ships fell from the sky, their engines sputtering out as they crashed to the frozen ground. The command center was no longer a threat. "We did it," Jace whispered, almost in disbelief. The tension that had held the team in place melted away, replaced by a feeling that was almost too surreal to comprehend. For the first time in years, they had a glimmer of hope. But Ilara knew better than to allow herself the luxury of relief. Not yet. The Xerics would retaliate, and they were far from beaten. However, the damage was done. Their operations had been fractured. The Silence counteroffensive was far from over, but this victory would give them the time they needed to rally the remaining resistance forces across the globe. And in that time, Earth could rise again. She looked at her team, each of them scared, but all of them standing tall. Kale grinned, a rare expression of satisfaction crossing his face. "This is it," Kale said, clapping his hands together. "We've finally got the edge. Now we fight." Ilara nodded, a fierce determination in her eyes. "Now we finish this." With the Xeric Central Command crippled, the global resistance began to mobilize with newfound vigor. Rebel cells, once scattered and disjointed, began to unify, coordinating their strikes and hitting the alien invaders at every turn. The Silent had successfully shattered the enemy's leadership, and the scales of war had tipped in humanity's favor. But Ilara knew the battle wasn't over. The Xerics were still a formidable foe, and their response would be brutal. Earth was not yet free, and the final fight for its survival would be a hard one. As they made their way out of the Arctic facility, the team moved with renewed purpose. The stakes had never been higher. The silent revolution that had begun in the shadows now had a face, and with it came the fierce will to survive, to resist, to fight for the future. The war was far from over, but Earth had just made its first real step toward victory. Ilara smiled grimly, knowing that the fight for freedom had only just begun.